Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. This technically is a book review video, but it's a bit different than our past book review episodes, as we are going to mention, I think, pretty much all the books we've read, but we're really only going to talk about 2 or 3 of them in depth, because we've actually talked about a few of these already, and a few of them we honestly just don't really feel like talking that in depth about. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to our podcast and for leaving a rating or a review on iTunes or on Spotify, really wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you for sharing it with like-minded Christians or people that you think might benefit or find interest in the things we talk about. That's how this podcast grows. It's because of you. You help us grow it and reach more people, and that enables us to do it more, and we're grateful that we get to do it. If you watch our podcast on YouTube, we would love it if you're able to hit the like button or leave a comment or subscribe to the channel. All those things are helpful as well. So with that said, let's get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Okay, well, I feel like this has nothing to do with the books. I mean, kind of. But I feel like I'm coming off like a teacher's high today. We just did our second week of classical conversations. And I think the only thing I love more than learning is teaching.
Okay.
And I think it's because it's the perfect mix of like the teacher learns the most. So I feel like I'm forced to sit down and learn these things so I'm able to teach them. And it's really, really fun.
Okay, this is so deja vu. It was 1 week ago we sat down to record our podcast.
Yes.
And I forget what the topic was that we were, it was, actually I think it was the one we talked about singleness. And you had just come from, your community group the community, what do you guys call it?
Yeah, Community Day.
Yes, with Classical Conversations. And you were just fired up and ready to talk about it. And now I'm realizing this should probably just be an ongoing theme. Update, yeah.
Seeing that we always come home on Wednesdays and then go straight into recording the podcast. You guys will notice, though, it's not sunny.
Oh, yes.
Blessing of blessings, the weather has changed.
Yeah, again, I don't want to speak too soon and say, thank goodness the warm days seem to be behind us, because I'm sure the upcoming cold days will have us singing a different tune, perhaps. But right now, it's a sweet spot, honestly. The fall weather, just enough coolness in the air to make you feel cozy when you get into our nice cozy tent. Okay, so that's all you have to say about teaching?
All I have to say, yes. I'm ready to dive into the books, because we have been reading a ton out here.
Yeah, that's been one of the highlights of living in the tent for me, is the amount of reading I've done. But what's funny is that I don't know if I've actually done that much more reading as I was looking at the books I've read over the last quarter. It's just I've done it at, I've done it at different times of the day. So when we had, conventional house, stick-built house, I would do all my reading almost entirely in the morning. I'd read some fiction in the evening from time to time. But then that's really flip-flopped, where I don't have the same morning routine. I miss that. Yeah, you've crushed a morning routine the last couple of weeks, which I'm sure you can talk about. But all my reading's been in bed in the evening, both fiction and nonfiction. And so I actually haven't read that much more than in previous quarters, but it's felt different.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's all just like consolidated at the end of the day. Yeah, I have really loved my morning routine. So that was something that I didn't have for the last 3 months. And it was really wearing on me not getting up before the kids. And Elisha bought this little homeschool tent for us. It's an 8x12. And sometimes you use it as an office, but I do feel like I've kind of commandeered the space.
Oh, it's primarily the homeschool room.
It is. And we've never had a homeschool room before. We've always just done school around the kitchen table. So this has actually been a really cool experiment. It's like when you live in different places and you live different ways, you're forced to live different ways, you learn new things. And I think that even when we go into a home again with 4 walls that aren't canvas, we will have a homeschool room because it just I'm just so much more focused on the kids. And I used to think, oh, this is really cool. And maybe when they were little, it was really cool to be able to multitask. And it's like, oh, I'm right next to my kitchen at the dining room, so I could feed my sourdough and come back and forth. But I am way more patient when it's just all I'm doing is school with the kids. So anyways, that's been really fun. And it's also been a spot. I do want to film a day in the life out here in the fall. I haven't done it the last couple weeks because it's been so sunny and hot. And that won't go on YouTube because I'm We're done sharing lifestyle on YouTube, if you guys know that. But it will probably go in the club, maybe in the email. But I think it'd be fun to walk you through my morning routine and stuff, because I've been getting up at 5 or 5:30. It's been so cozy in the tent. I've loved it. And anyways, why am I off on that tangent? I don't know. It's just my favorite time of the day now. So
you have a morning routine now, so I'm guessing that's when you've been doing some of your reading. Your reading, is it?
No, some of these books I just read at chunks in the afternoon, like on hot summer days.
Okay.
I'd sit and read while the kids played. So I read more this summer than I did in past quarters, and then I read in the evenings.
Okay, anyways, I'll dive into one of the books I'm excited to share about. We haven't talked about this one yet on the podcast, and that is Man of the House by C.R. Wiley. I love the back. It says, "What is your plan for the end of the world as we know it? How will you protect the people you love? What will you leave them when you are gone? The good news is that this is not the first time the world has ended. What's more, men were made for times like these, and the men of the past, the good ones anyway, have left us a plan to follow. They built houses to last, houses that could weather a storm. This book contains their plan." So it was really fun. It's funny. It was really hard for me to, at the beginning, I feel like this was a perfect example of the power of a recommendation, because this book came recommended by your dad, who we're always grateful when he gives us book recommendations, and it was recommended to him by your cousin Payne, your cousin Mallory's husband Payne, and so that gave me a lot more fortitude to stick with it, because in the first few chapters I was having a hard time, I guess, staying focused and figuring out where the heck he was going with his illustrations, with the stories he was telling. And I think your cousin Payne even put it well. He said, yeah, it's kind of meandering at the beginning in the first few chapters. I was like, yeah, that's a good way to put it. You're like, where are we going here? But then it ended up just gripping me by, a third of the way through. And I blazed through it. Obviously, it's a pretty short read. And then I read it again because I wanted to give the first part another chance. I was like, wait a second, I think I need to focus up a little bit more, which is a common error I make. Every time I go to book club, I'm like, man, I was having a hard time staying focused in the first, quarter. And then by the time I was finishing up, I was really kicking myself for not staying focused in the first quarter, because I'm like, I'm sure I'm missing something here. Anyways, so Man of the House by C.R. Wiley. Highly recommend this one. For obviously men in particular, but really for families, for husbands and wives. It is really, it's really encouraging. It's really empowering. And I feel like he does a great job of equipping men with a vision and with the practical skills, I'd say necessary, or at the very least, very helpful to executing a vision for your family. So anyways, he's also written a few more books that I ordered one of them, something about the family and the cosmos or something, but really recommend C.R. Wiley's Man of the House. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a book that I still want to read. I forgot about that actually till you just pulled it out.
Yeah, I think you would enjoy it.
And it just sounds so cool. I know he talks about, like, what is it, the economy of the house or something?
Yeah,
is that what it is?
It's so fun. And it is always so interesting when you start seeing these overlaps. We interviewed Nancy Pearcey, who wrote The Toxic War on Masculinity, amongst other great books. And she, in that book, The Toxic War on Masculinity, highlights how the Industrial Revolution was really a turning point in the overall function of the home. And then it started having a dramatic impact on how we viewed the home and the value of the home and the general economy of the home. And he does the same thing, excuse me, really, in seeing how, the household as it's like so not what we think of today. We don't think of our homes or our houses as being places of economical value creation. And if anything, like you hear about like child labor laws, and you're kind of like, well, yeah, you can't profit off of your kids. But then he points out, like, maybe you're not, like, so we're not supposed to profit off of our kids, but other people can. In other words, you can pay, for childcare. You can pay the government to educate your kids. You can pay for other people, other professionals, right, to take care of the medical needs of your children or the mental needs of your children, coaching. And so while we're not allowed to economically profit at all from our children. And obviously there's some good reasons why child labor laws were put into place, because there's been many humans that have abused children. over the years. But when you look at it from a Christian perspective, and God-honoring parents and parents that love their children and cherish, their children and want to see them thrive and prosper, it only makes sense for the well-being of the household to view your children as value creators. Because when you view them as value creators, you start treating them as such, and then they start viewing themselves as such. And it is so common to use the language within, 21st century, I guess, culture and society in Christendom as well, to view children as just a liability. They only cost and take away. They deplete your net worth. They deplete your ability to earn and to save money. Whereas in times past, that was the exact opposite. Sure, there was a time period early on where you were investing into them, as you do with any worthy investment. You are putting into something, financially or with your time and energy before you get a return. And so certainly there is a time period in children's lives where they're not really producing much economically, and you're just pouring into them. But the expectation was always, hey, we're going to have a return on this investment that's beyond, the great things that we enjoy relationally, or spiritually. Of course, we want to see great fruit in those areas, but to expect no, they're going to bring value in a monetary way, in a material way to the home, to the household, with their skill sets, with their talents, with their ability to even earn, with their ability to maximize our properties that the Lord's blessed us with. And so it was really fun to get a vision for that and to, start instilling it into my children, hopefully early on. And Joel Salatin talked about this, having them view themselves as value creators is really helpful.
Yeah, it's funny because in the popular culture, all we hear about is it costs this much to diaper a baby, send them to college, pay their dental bills, all that. All we hear is about the expense per child, and people stop having children for the reason that they can't, in air quotes, afford anymore. And then it is funny, like you mentioned, I remember our public school loved when high schoolers would come play sports because they got paid per head. And so if we were there playing sports, they were getting paid for us just like we were an active student in the school. And so it's just kind of interesting how you show that other people can profit economically, and yet it sounds inappropriate.
Yeah, abusive or something.
Yeah, for a parent to see a child as a net add instead of a net loss.
Yes.
Aside from the obvious things of relational, and there are so many things outside of economics that make relationships just beautiful, regardless of what the economics.
Yeah, the value of the human is
the value of the human has nothing to do with their economic net win or net loss.
Of course, but we're created as value creators, right? We're created in the image of God. What was he? He was a creator. He was one that made things. He created things. He obviously added value, and then he equipped us and gave us this, responsibility of stewardship and adding value and creating more value. And so, in the home and the household is the most logical place to really exercise those callings and the talents that have been. It's not the only place, but it should be the first place that we exercise those gifts and those talents for God's glory, for relational purposes, for ministry, and in all those things, there's going to be economical prospering as well, and that should be looked upon as a good thing. And he also goes into, and then we'll move on.
No,
how
this
was
great.
another turning point in just the view of the stay-at-home mom or a wife not working out in the public economy, and how that started being used in a pejorative manner, where people weren't viewing household work as valuable anymore, because in a lot of ways the household wasn't viewed as a value-creating institution. And so, yes, we never want to diminish the spiritual nourishment and the emotional, enrichment and nurturing that takes place from a mother to children, but also to say there's a reason that it's highlighted. When the boss mom can go out and make millions of dollars, it's that's a monetary value system. It's a worldly value system that we don't view the same as the world, but it still is a value system. And there is something to be said about a household that functions well and is, feeding its own well. It's equipping its own well. It's able to have show hospitality, to show, generosity to the community, to be a place of philanthropy in the greater community and into the world, and highlighting the matron and the matriarch of that household is something that used to happen a lot more. So anyways, he talks about that as well. You don't have to wait until November to vote. You can vote every day with your dollar. At GoodRanchers.com, you can make a powerful choice to vote for American meat, support American agriculture, and make your voice heard for transparency in our food. Good Rancher. Oh, okay, dang it. I tell you what, one of these days I'm going to get through an entire read without sounding like a moron. But today's not that day. Good Ranchers sources all their meat exclusively from American farms, which not only supports local ranchers, but also ensures that you receive high-quality American-raised meat with no antibiotics, no added hormones, or seed oils ever. By shopping from GoodRanchers.com, you're making a statement about the kind of values you stand for. Values of quality, hard work, and dedication to American tradition. And right now, Good Ranchers is having a presidential promo. For a limited time, you can get a free add-on for a whole 4 years until the next election. That means when you subscribe to any of their boxes, you get to decide if you want extra plain chicken breasts, Angus ground beef, Applewood smoked bacon, or wild-caught salmon in every order for 4 years. It's the perfect way to ensure you always have high-quality American meat in your kitchen. Every cut is pre-trimmed, individually packed, and vacuum sealed, which makes your life easier. No more messy meal prep and no more wasted food because of freezer burn or poor store packaging. Good Ranchers helps you get the most flavor and value out of every ounce of meat you buy. And in this economy, that matters more each day. Don't miss out. Use my code Voetberg. It's really our code. Our code Voetberg to claim this presidential promo worth over $1,200 and bring 100% American meat to your family meals until 2028. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered.
Well, yeah, thanks for giving us some of those nuggets so people, if they wander on through the first path, they know there's some good stuff up ahead. Yeah. Okay, so a book that I really loved this summer was Until the Streetlights Come On, and it's by Ginny Urich, I think is how you say her name. She's the founder of 1,000 Hours Outside, which I'm sure you've heard of if you are a mother in the 21st century. And we did her challenge last year. This year we did 1,000 hours in the summer. So we really aren't doing the whole challenge this year because we just are living outside and are spending the majority of our time out of doors. But it was just really encouraging to go through all her research on how children are safer than they've ever been, on how to let your kids play and explore, the value of dangerous play, the value of creativity that kids discover outside, and how play prepares them for an uncertain future. As I'm looking through here, I don't know, there's lots of bent pages in here. I really, really like that. And I do agree with this statement here. I mean, here's just one thing I underlined here. But she's saying that back in the day, emotional safety superseded that of physical safety. And that's really flipped today in our culture, where we are so concerned that our kids have their helmets and their car seats and everything just right, which is great. But the emotional safety of our kids, I mean, we have kids on anxiety meds and depression meds and behavioral meds at young ages because they can't cope with what is going on emotionally around them. And that has a large part of that has to do with what we're allowing into their environment as parents. And there's some genetic stuff that's going along with that, the food we're eating, stuff like that, but environment plays a lot into that. So anyways, just lots of... Like, listen to this. I'm just flipping over to my bent pages. She goes, there is not a single exception. All screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. And that's from a study that she lists here.
Wow. I mean,
no
that's
exception.
A huge statement. No,
huge
really?
Statement.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is more than just hey, get your kids outside, play in the dirt, play, don't do, it's fascinating, the research that she has in here. And I thought it was going to be a repeat of some of the other books I've read, and it wasn't. It was fresh and new. So I would highly encourage it for any parent that's looking for fresh motivation on how to go uphill in culture when it comes to parenting our kids.
I know I've been pondering a little bit of those concepts. Again, I haven't read that one, but did Lisa Bass reference this one when we were speaking with her? Till the streetlights
I
come on.
believe
Or
she
maybe
did.
the coddling of the American.
Yeah,
was
she
it
did. Mm-hmm.
One of the two, and that concept of we insulate and protect our children to a fault, physically, anyways. And it's like I've been chewing on that a little bit, just like wondering, like, man, where's the fine? Is there a fine line here? Is it going to look different for everyone? It's funny because that just came up in a podcast I was listening to. It was, one of those Navy SEAL podcasts that I'll stumble upon from time to time. And it was the guy that's been like leading or whatever in charge of the BUDS training for a bit. And he was talking about how he doesn't like using the term mitigate risk anymore. He likes to say, what is it? What did he say instead of mitigating risk? It's, oh boy, I forget what it is, but he says we can't get away from the fact that risk is a part of what we do. And the problem when you try to mitigate risk early on is it actually increases the risk down the road when the consequences are far greater. And I think we do that oftentimes as parents, where we try to mitigate risk to a fault early on when the consequences are pretty minor. Like even just a kid, falling off a step, like that's very minor, and that's a great way for them to learn coordination, for them to learn the capabilities of their body, to get balance figured out, rather than, we hear some sad stories of people being peer pressured into, jumping off bridges into water or jumping off cliffs into water, and that's their first time experiencing, being airborne and not having any control of their body, and they're paralyzed or worse, they die. And that's kind of an extreme example, but I feel like it shows the point of, like, I'm at a place now where I'm not peer pressured into jumping off cliffs. And I also know that I don't have very good control of my body in the air, right? Like, I know my boundaries when it comes to heights and to if I'm going to flip or not flip or whatever, just because I've experienced enough to know, like your brothers have phenomenal body control in the air. I don't. And I'm just like aware of that through life experience when the consequences were smaller. And I don't know why I just used like the jumping illustration. But
I think it's a great example. It's something that actually came up recently that had us talking.
Yes.
Because we've seen these teens get hurt really bad. And it's like, okay, do we just train our kids to never do anything and to stay completely risk averse physically? Or do we let them be comfortable and know where their limits are taking risks because they've taken little risks and they know, okay, that could hurt me, this can't.
Yes.
I mean, Elisha's too. You say you're not that great with your body control in the air, but like you flip off stuff and do tricks off things, and I'd say you're way better than the average person.
I don't know what the average person does. I know I don't look good when I do it.
Yes,
I'm like
you
a stiff
do.
as a board. But it is something that I've had to learn, especially with skiing with your family, being okay, being like, I can't follow them off those jumps just because, like, I've been off enough jumps to know I don't know how to control my body, and the bigger the jump, the greater the consequences, controlling your speed, knowing how to regulate my speed leading up to the jump. And so, like, guts is admirable to an extent, right? But you also want capability with guts. And with things like, whatever, the examples we're giving, there is a real capability that is, I think, required. Usually it's not just guts for things like that, and the consequences can be extreme.
And basically what we want our children to learn while they're here at home, or this perspective that I got, is to help them figure out how to make good risk assessments for themselves. So sometimes we keep our kids so under lock and key, they're like, mommy's or daddy are making all the decisions as to what's safe for you and what's not. And obviously there is wisdom in that at times. It's like, our opinion definitely trumps theirs. But whenever we can, letting our kids make those own risk assessments for themselves. And I love a question. I don't know if I got that from this book or this stack of books here, but it was, do you feel safe? And instead of telling our kids, hey, that's not safe, asking them, do you feel safe? So like when my kids are halfway up a tree, we've got a lot of trees out here and they go pretty high. And I'm like, do you feel safe? And sometimes they're like, I'm a little high. Then it's like, you should probably come down a bit. And sometimes they're like, yeah, I feel totally comfortable and in control. But it's making them at least, and sometimes I can say, hey, I'm your mom. You're going to come down. That's too high.
You're not safe.
Right?
You need to get back from the cliff. Yeah.
Whenever I can, having them think about making their own judgment calls.
Yeah.
Because eventually kids will have to. We've got a lot of boys, and eventually they're going to make their own judgment calls. And I don't want them breaking their necks trying all this stuff.
Right.
Because they just go for it. And we had friends like that growing up too. that just like we're all guts and all glory and no control. And I really don't want that for our boys. So anyways, it'll bring up good discussion between you and your husband.
I like it. Okay, was that your book? I'll buzz through a few of these. So Douglas Wilson has this fictional series, the Marine Time series. And it's funny, I started by reading these to the kids, and we got through like half of one of these, and then we, started another book as a family, but I kind of liked them. And so they're written for, I think, like, fourth graders maybe, fourth or fifth graders. But I read 4 of them this past summer. And yeah, Susan Creek, 2 Williams, Blackthorn Winter, and Barbary Jihad. They're just fun adventure stories, kind of based around the East Coast. And so there's some fun historical figures that get sprinkled in to it, into the stories. And of course, there's pirates. This is the Marine Time series. So anyways, fun. I think, the boys will read these. They're just fun adventure stories. And what's fun about these is that there's very clear, moral lessons that are illustrated through these. Just, doing the right thing at all costs, just doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and showing how that will oftentimes give you what appears to be, bad results, seemingly forever. Sometimes it's temporary. Sometimes you see the payoff of just doing the right thing in your life. Sometimes you don't. And what we are called to do is just do the right thing as Christians. And so it's fun when you can tell the story of people doing the right thing in an inspirational way, whether or not it ends well for them in earthly terms.
Yeah. And what's pretty fun is that these were given to Leon by a neighbor boy. And it's like, man, you feel grateful that you have the neighbors you have when their 9-year-old son is giving your 7-year-old son books as a gift, and you're grateful for the books he's bringing them. So anyways, we just feel very blessed that way. Also, if you guys hear, I don't know if you guys can hear the tractors and all the equipment and all the stuff going on, but I'm not going to apologize for it because I'm so glad it's happening. Progress on the build is progress. So we can all just enjoy the sounds together here. Okay, this was a really fun book. I mentioned it briefly on another podcast. It's called Sixpence in Her Shoe. I kind of wish I'd paid the extra money and gotten the hardcover after I read it. It's by Phyllis McGinley. She was actually on a Time magazine for her writing. Wow. And this book was over 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list back in the day. I think she wrote it in the 60s. And I love this. This is, let me see, where's a statement that kind of sums up this book? Okay. For the woman who has everything, including the kitchen sink, the kids, the laundry, the budget, and the Joneses to get her down, here's a delightful pick-up that tells her just how lucky she is. And I feel like that's totally what this book is all about. Again, so many bent pages. She talks about marriage in here, motherhood. She talks about the value of homemaking and why it is such a worthy calling and where people get it wrong. She talks about the value of education for women. And I love her perspective because she is such a fan of highly educated women and them using those gifts in their homes. And I feel like it's rare that you find that combination so strong, and she argues both sides so well. And then she just talks about keeping a home. So awesome ways to cook. She talks about the anti-cook and how kitchens were just coming in that looked really beautiful and no one made any food in them. And isn't that the culture we live in today? And so I got some great cooking tips for how to set up a kitchen and stuff like that based on her stuff here. She talks about raising children and how that you need manners to have morality. And so it's kind of interesting with her argument to think, some of these things we're drilling into our kids, they're just rote drills now, but they can lead to an understanding of morality down the road.
Interesting. So you need manners.
I think the chapter's called Manners Are Morality.
Wow.
Which obviously you've got to read her argument. Yeah,
I think
manners or morals.
Morals. I think what you said to me, and I don't know if this is true, that maybe you said something along these lines. The way I took it was, you can have manners without having morals. In other words, you can just do the thing and not be coming from a good place. You can be faking it, right? We all know that exists, but you can't have morals without manners. Is that right?
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. And so, anyways, I would just highly recommend this.
Oh wait, no, you can't have morals. What did I say?
I don't know, but they just need to read the book, so it works out. It's just a really fun read. She's so well written. And again, just for any mother in America or around the globe, actually, just read this book. She's funny. She makes you feel smarter just reading it. And I feel like she has an incredible biblical worldview. I don't agree with everything in the book, parenting and stuff like that. She has one little chapter called Our Children People and Our Children Humans or something like that. And I feel like her humor was Okay,
real quick. If you're looking for music lessons for your family, piano lessons, guitar lessons, fiddle lessons, ukulele lessons, mandolin lessons, you can subscribe to Voetberg Music Academy and get lessons for the whole family. Subscribe to the piano course, one subscription, get you piano lessons for the whole family. Subscribe to guitar, that gets you guitar lessons for the whole family. We'll link it below. You get a special discount, and you can see that below by listening to our podcast. That's how you get the discount. Go check it out.
Early attempt at a lot of the humor that we see on social media now regarding our kids, where the kids are kind of the brunt of the jokes. But I feel like overall she really elevates a marriage relationship and the place that the Lord has for a woman, both in the home and outside in society. So
that's awesome.
Really enjoyed that.
That's great. I'm not going to speak much about this one because we did like a full episode on the rise and fall of dispensationalism. Highly recommend it. Again, it's funny because I feel like this just kind of informed us on a lot of things, and I don't know if it necessarily brought more conviction. It brought more clarity, which I think will lead to conviction down the road. But I don't know. I don't want to. I've thought a lot about it even since our last episode. And so,
really?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not going to get hung up on it.
It was huge for me.
Yeah.
In clarifying what I believe now and just what I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I was just in my Bible time this morning. I love God's word, and it's like always go to God's word and just read it. But then like the more aware you get of your own filters, you're like, man, I'm going to read that again. Can I read that through this filter or through that filter? And I don't think it's been helpful, but I don't know. I thought for sure I was on this trajectory towards like covenantal theology. We've been in a more reformed space, meaning like our community, the books we've been reading, and that's definitely still my trajectory. But then much of the dispensational, I guess, filter that I had growing up with, I still can't not see when I'm reading a lot, just reading the Bible. And so
interesting.
Yeah. And I guess I'm becoming more aware of it, which is probably good, but I don't necessarily like disagree with how I grew up interpreting a lot of different passages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we're going to have to talk about it. You know?
Yeah, we are way on different sides of that theological spectrum, which is great because we have been before.
I mean, I feel like I'm sure it's a teeter-totter thing because that's a dangerous one. Remember last time I tried to say teeter-totter? That did not go well.
I don't actually.
Yeah. But I think that like once I knew of the option for like that partial preterist view of different passages, it just like gave me so much clarity and freedom to read things how I felt like were more straightforward. I was like, okay, thank you. Like that actually is an option. It always bugged me when I'd be, reading these things only in this futuristic lens. And so that certainly has been helpful, and that's shaped a lot of how I've read the Bible the last couple of years. But yeah, anyways, it's just a part of the growth and the journey. So yeah,
we both highly recommend the book, though, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Wouldn't you?
Oh, I think it's a great book.
I think it's a fantastic book, regardless of what you believe about dispensationalism or covenant theology, or have some other perspective on the structure of the Bible and how it was written. It's just a great informational read, and I don't feel like the author is trying to argue a very totally specific point in there. I feel like he presents really good research, and it's a book on the church history of dispensationalism, how it came into our country and our culture here in America. And so it's really fascinating. It's been very freeing for me to understand where dispensationalism came from and to read the New Testament without that dispensational lens, and it makes so much more sense to me. But again, that's the fun walk of a believer, and that's a fun walk of being married too, and learning with your spouse and the Lord showing you different things and then discussing it. And yeah, so that's fun. We've already talked way too much about this book, so I'm just going to briefly mention it. It's 8 errors parents make and how to avoid them. It's the number one parenting book I'd recommend currently at this time. So
Boom.
that is a great book.
Nice. All right, I'll just mention this quickly. Many of you know at book club, we've been going through Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers, kind of, what would you call that, a series, a saga? There's multiple books, and we're on book 3 now, The Vicomte of Bragelonne. I think that's how you say it, 10 years later. So the first book was The Three Musketeers, and then it was 20 years later, and then now we're at The Vicomte of Bragelonne, 10 years later, and I love this whole series so much. My favorite book up until this point, my favorite fiction for the last 10 years has been The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, and now I think that this whole series collectively kind of rivals that one book, if that makes sense, but just love the world he's created, and I love spending a lot of time in this world.
That's great. These are 2 that I read early at the beginning of the summer when I had a lot of time to read. One of them was The Opt-Out Family. I've mentioned this before, and I really felt like it's called How to Give Your Kids What Technology Can't. I think we've done a whole episode on this book, so I will link that down below because there were so many nuggets in it. It's by Aaron Lochner. So anyways, that is one, and I'm going to reference one more too.
Do it.
Is that okay?
Bust it out.
While I'm here. And then The Coddling of the American Mind, which I've talked so much about, how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. And again, just lots of great takeaways here. Paranoid parenting, the untruth of emotional reasoning, always trust your feelings. I love this. Oh, maybe this is where I got that whole safety piece. He says here, we teach children to monitor themselves for the degree to which they feel unsafe and then talk about how unsafe they feel. And they come to believe that feeling unsafe, that feeling of being uncomfortable or anxious, is a reliable sign that they are unsafe. And our kids shouldn't always trust their feelings. And so this has been something we've worked with a couple of our kids. And I think we've seen real growth in that can kind of tend to be paranoid about things that aren't actually scary or shouldn't be scary. And instead of giving weight to that and being like, oh yeah, like there are all these creepy, scary things in the dark, or there are, monsters under the bed, being like, well, that's not a truth, and we can't always trust our feelings. And so just because we feel like we're outside of our comfort zone, or just because we feel like we're unsafe or scared, doesn't mean that that's always true. So we need to look at facts. And so anyways, it just has a lot of great things. I think there's a lot of things that I have just assumed growing up in America as, oh, this is healthy, this isn't healthy. And it's like, oh, that's been a coddling of my mind. And I don't want to have that for my kids, and I don't want to have that for myself. And so, again, great research in this book. It was a New York Times bestseller and gives a good perspective fighting back on things that I've just assumed are healthy for development or even for myself. So, really good book.
Yeah, some of the things you would talk about were really convicting to me, because I think we do this, when you're like a conservative person, all you see is how liberals freak out about different concepts and they're not willing to talk about it. But it really, in some of the things you wrote, just highlighted how I do the exact same thing. And I'm so uncomfortable with the doing what he calls, I think, like mental gymnastics or mental exercises, that are just like, no, like, let's debate your idea. Let's talk about why you believe you're right in this area. And it's like, I've ran from those discussions, and I've ran from those ideas when it comes to real life. And it's not, I don't think it's healthy. Like, I don't think you need to be scared to engage in things that challenge your thinking, like not in a, I guess you would say it better, but realizing I was coddling my own mind by not being willing to disagree with people, by not being willing to bring up topics that I thought could offend someone. And so I don't know, I'm glad we have a new perspective now on equipping our kids and actually giving them the skills to disagree, giving them the skills to have, deep thoughts around what they believe and why they believe it.
Yeah, we want our kids to be critical thinkers. And I think we see this in so many areas. We see this in the church with an inability to see another church's perspective or another part of the body's perspective, or being comfortable just disagreeing on a part of the body's perspective.
Yes.
We'd rather just cut people off or say, that's wrong, because we get scared instead of being okay having a difference of opinion. And so I think we see this politically, we see this socially, we see this culturally on a lot of different levels. It's really easy to be a part of it.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it was a good book to challenge our thinking.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, the last one. I tell you what. So this was Why God Calls Us to Face False Accusations by Bill Gothard. And Bill Gothard came up in conversation a few weeks back. I forget how it came up, but we were talking about, because many of you know, I grew up in ATI probably until I was maybe 15 years old. You and your family spent some time in ATI.
We attended a couple conferences. Yeah, we were never like apart.
Okay.
But we did do a couple conferences, buy the wisdom booklets, have the character sketches.
Yeah, I was ATI like a membership thing? Because I think, is that what it was?
I'm not totally sure, but I knew that there were people where it was like their homeschool curriculum. They were just a lot more like involved, if that makes sense. I don't know
how you were in or how you were not in.
What the tiers were of involvement. Yeah, but we were kind of like the sightseers.
Yeah.
That'd stop in.
Yes. And I think we were a little bit more involved than you guys were, or for maybe a longer period of time. And so, yeah, there's been all sorts of, I guess, like that documentary, Shiny Happy People, was kind of that was featuring a lot of ATI and Bill Gothard. And we started that, and it was clear from the beginning, okay, this is made from a God-hating perspective. And so it's really kind of hard to get to the truth in any of it, right? Like, I just never, we've talked about this before. It's like, it was like 10 years of our life. And then it was this big, I guess, emotional, controversial subject. And we were just never a part of those controversies that I'm aware of, right? Like, my parents were in it, and people were like, oh, it's a cult. But again, that's a huge statement, because I don't know what qualifies as a cult, but like, I think we were a part of ATI, but we were also going to a church, like we were going to a mainstream evangelical church, Church of God. Then we were going to a Nazarene church, then a Calvary Chapel church. And everybody else that we knew in ATI was going to those types of churches as well. And so I think they were certainly legalistic, ATI as an organization. And anyways, I'm saying this all to say, Bill Gothard came up, and I was like, what is that guy doing? And through this, there was, through Google and stuff, you realize, oh man, there's all these accusations of sexual assault. And you're like, no way. And then you realize, okay, none of these came to fruition. They were just allegations. And then all charges got dropped, and they dismissed the case. And you're thinking like, well, what is it? Because somebody just said this guy's a pedophile, and that's like a huge statement that hasn't been proven. And so I almost got like defensive, just for the sake of, I guess, truth, being like, hey, like, you can disagree with the guy, but like, you have to have some, like, there are actual, processes that the court has in place for somebody to be guilty of these things, and people didn't want to, go through those processes. And so I got his books thinking like, man, I don't think this is that big of a deal. Like, I kind of want to hear more of this guy's story. And it's funny because, I mean, again, I'm not calling him a pedophile or a cult leader, because I think those things kind of have to be, you have to like define terms here. Yeah, I mean, well, with like the pedophile, that is defined, and none of that's been proven, right? Like, none of that's just a huge deal.
Well, I also watched like on YouTube a lot of this isn't like in defense of Bill Gothard, but I have watched several of the girls' testimonies of technically what he did, and he never did anything in any of their testimonies, but they know of a friend who that he did do something to, and it's all hearsay, I guess. So they'll say like, he was grooming me, but then can't prove that any of that happened, even though they were feeling uncomfortable. So it just kind of, I mean, there were crazy parts in the story, like, oh yeah, at ATI, they'd chain kids to trees and all through the night and discipline them. And I'm like,
whoa.
Okay, that did not happen. Like, I don't know where you are on planet Earth, but that's like a crime, and someone would have called 911. Like, there were so many parts to the Three Gal Stories I listened to where I was like, this is a total fictional tale, that it was hard to take anything for granted. It kind of seemed just attention grabbing. And again, I think I get defensive for Christian leaders that get these things said of them, because anyone can say it, and then it's like your reputation is marred forever.
Yeah.
And just because someone decided to say something. And so there were So I guess unless something's been proven,
Right.
or unless the leader comes forward and says, hey, I was guilty on these counts, which Bill Gothard never did, I think you have to be really careful, because obviously someone could come do that to my husband. They could say, oh, make up a story about him. And I think that has happened in past, for sure, where women have taken advantage of that. And I also think women have been taken advantage of. So I'm not here to be judge and jury for all these different things. But because nothing was proven, it has made us more...
again,
we aren't just like jumping on that bandwagon. Like, just because a lot of people said this definitely happened, and this guy was definitely a creep. It's kind of like, I don't know.
Again, when I read the testimonies, it's like, okay, well, I'd see no crime in any of these things that you just, testified about. Was it unwise? Was this not good discernment? Yeah, like, would I be really upset if my daughter was in that situation with a guy of his age that's in that position? Yeah, I was like, that is all not, it's just not wise. It's not, it's not good discernment. It shouldn't have happened. And that's one thing. But then saying this guy needs to go to prison is another thing, right? Like, those are two different things, where he needs to be convicted of this crime. And so when I hear these things, it's like, yeah, I wouldn't want my wife in that situation. I wouldn't want my daughter in that situation. But like, there's no crime here in what you're saying. And so you can't accuse somebody of a crime unless you're going to bring the crime. Anyways, so again, who knows where he's at with all of these things? I'm not, that's not the point of me reading this book. I read this book, so I was like, what is this guy doing? And I was blown away with it is so weird. Like, I'm truly perplexed on how this man really gained the influence that he did. Again,
in the conservative space specifically.
Yeah, in the conservative space. Because it is weird. I mean, yeah, it's like there's a bunch of like new agey sounding stuff in his theology, a lot of like prosperity gospel sounding theology, a lot of legalism, like quid pro quo type stuff. Like, if you do enough for God, then he's bound to do, he's committed to doing something for you. And like, when you see his origins, it's like, man, how did he get to leading such a prominent conservative Christian organization that was extremely, legalistic in its, as far as like regulating the music you could allow in your house, the clothes you could wear. It's like, it's a true perplexity to me. And I guess part of me wanted to be like, hey guys, it's not that big of a deal. Like, every ministry leader has their faults, but I'm a little perturbed, I guess, by the theology behind what built, ATI and how I was brought up. And I do kind of feel protected because we got out when I was 15. And so, a lot of people that I know that I'm close with, I think they were involved in more pivotal years of their life where they do have more emotional resentment towards it because it actually did mess up their thinking. It contributed to them having a ton of conflicts in their faith and crises in their faith. And so I'm grateful that wasn't my experience, but it's been really interesting kind of revisiting some of these things that the terms that I grew up with or the concepts that I grew up with and being like, whoa, I don't think this is biblical at all. Like, this is far out there, weird stuff. So yeah, it's been interesting.
But like you said, it's more fringing on New Age and prosperity than it was on. There were a lot of rules, but it wasn't necessarily conservative. Like, no. his theology, when you go and you read these books that we got, it's like, how did he like get a conservative board, or like the conservative community was susceptible or like wanted leadership and so just started banding around this guy? Like, where did all the rules for the dress lengths and stuff come in? Because he doesn't have that vibe, and he didn't start out that way. Like, my parents were not conservative. My mom I wouldn't say was conservative at all, and she like went to one of his conferences for young people growing up. It just seemed a lot more mass, like
mainstream kind of.
What were the seminar? Institute of Basic Life Principles. And then we're also kind of curious, like, how did a single guy transition into marriage and family, and why were marriages and families looking to this guy for leadership with their marriages and families that he had no experience in? So anyways, it's more just like we're kind of befuddled.
Yeah, I'm befuddled because even when you go through more of his biography, like early on when he was doing his evangelical or his evangelism kind of rallies, it wasn't targeted towards a conservative group at all. In fact, he was, like getting just like popular secular bands to come play, using all sorts of, I guess what we would call kind of like gimmicks to draw crowds. To then share the gospel. And again, coming out of that Chicago, it's just weird seeing his timeline after reading the dispensational book too. Just like all that was happening around Chicago in that during that time frame. That's the seeker sensitive movement coming out of there. Anyways, but that is the true. Yeah, I'm with you, Katie, babe. It's like, did he get co-opted by like an established conservative community that then brought in all the dress standards and the kind of seemingly I think arbitrary standards around conduct and standards,
music, media, all those things.
Media, yeah, exactly. Wives, husbands, all of it, and then how did he get into the family space? Because it's like, man, I feel like that was just not a good call for people. I mean, for people even just like, adhering to his principles, as he called them, and that's what's so funny. Remember, Douglas Wilson talked about principles versus methods, and even though his whole thing was, Institute of Basic Life Principles, it really wasn't. It was like Institute of Basic Life Methods. Like, hey, this is how you do it. This is how you are guaranteed to have your thoughts captive before the Lord. And it was always 7 steps or 9 steps. This is how you always walk in joy. It's these 4 steps. This is how you never fall into sexual immorality. It's these, 6 steps, and very, very methods based. Anyways, it's really been intriguing, and I'm grateful that we left ATI at the time that we did. I do pray for the families that were involved, and I don't know if ATI is still going, that still are involved, because I do think that there is a lot of lies in that general space. And I think that it really takes away from the power of the gospel and actually being able to experience the freedom from sin, the freedom from guilt, the freedom from bondage that can come in fully embracing and believing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah. Anyways, that's kind of a mystery. We'll probably continue pulling on the threads. We're kind of intrigued by that because I think there's so many hot button opinions around that ministry. And instead of, I think we get kind of curious as to like, well, what are the roots of this and where did all this emotion come from and who was this guy anyways? And so anyways, we've been kind of learning a lot more about that the past couple of years. Okay, my last one here is Becoming Michelle Obama. I read this and really, really enjoyed it.
Is it called Becoming Michelle or Obama?
Oh, I think it's just called Becoming
by Michelle Obama.
Yeah,
right?
But I think that's kind of, it's kind of a play on words because it's like Becoming Michelle Obama. And you have Becoming Me, Becoming Us, Becoming More.
Nice.
So I think it could read Becoming Michelle Obama if you wanted.
That makes sense.
I finished this actually in the end of July. And again, lots of bent pages in this book. Fascinating read. Disagree with her on a lot of levels, but it's so interesting on how, even how Michelle wants to be such a liberal and can't totally, especially in the family space. And I think this is why her and Obama's marriage really works. Like even this, I underline this, why their marriage works. She goes, Barack wanted a modern partnership. He saw marriage as an alignment of 2 people who could lead parallel lives, but without forgoing any independent dreams or ambitions. For me, marriage is more like a full-on merger, a reconfiguring of 2 lives into one, with the well-being of a family taking precedence over any one agenda or goal. I don't believe the pursuit of one person's dreams should come at the expense of the couple.
Oh, yeah.
But she has a lot of statements like that on childbearing. This is a woman that's pro-choice, and the way she talks about life in her womb is just makes you so excited for life.
Wow.
And her perspective on becoming a mother. So anyways, it's really fascinating to see where there's fruit, even in a secular couple, there's always biblical roots.
Oh, sure. The good fruit in their life kind of comes from the natural order that God put into place and then following it.
It comes from proverbial truths playing out because there's no fruit in the belief system that she says she believes.
Right.
And yet, I'm not saying on every single like social, economic, whatever level, but I am saying on a family, marriage, spiritual level.
Well, if there's no fruit in those levels, then ultimately there's not going to be any fruit on all the other levels.
Yeah, but I'm saying even if you disagree, I guess, or agree on politics, because I know there's Christians that probably agree with some of her policies or whatever on politics.
Whoa.
Elisha, this is not going to become a totally political thing. I think that was interesting too, honestly, seeing the politics and I genuinely think people have, not all people, but some people have really good hearts and like, this is a big problem. We need to change it. And then they propose a solution and you're like, that's not going to help. But like, it makes sense that you think it would.
Sure.
Based on your upbringing and based on your experience. And, yeah, it's kind of fascinating just even how she was pulled out of school and put on a faster track with brighter children early on. And yet she's a big proponent of brighter kids being in the same classroom as slower kids to elevate the slower classroom, right? But that wasn't her experience. And so you kind of see how things just don't work out, and like what she says and what she does. But anyways, I think there was a lot to learn in this book. It was fascinating to learn about just the presidential run, the campaign, how she was just all in backing Barack, and their marriage, how they make it work, raising their kids. Politics was super intriguing to me. Her getting into an Ivy League school was super intriguing. And yeah, I just thought it was a very fascinating read. I learned a lot. I was really encouraged by her story. I cried like multiple times in this book. Yeah, she had a really sweet family that she grew up in. And
yeah, once again, you talked about like the sacrifice her mom made.
Yes.
How that was so admirable. And yet it's the opposite of kind of like what feminism teaches, and she's like a champion of feminism.
Yes, and speaks so highly of her mom and sees what her mom did for her, and yet speaks the exact opposite, but values more what her mom did.
Right.
And so I think you just see like in our hearts, like the way God designed us, we know what is healthy and we know what we crave, and yet there's certain ideals that for social or political or cultural reasons we've been taught to think or we want to think, and yet it's just not right. And I think that happens to all of us as humans on a lot of different levels. And so it was a really good book, and I'd highly recommend it.
Nice. There we go. I tell you what, folks, I love hearing from you, Katie, but hopefully Luke is our video editor is going to be able to edit out much of the rigmarole of today's episode. We had the dog going crazy. We had a few kids getting hurt. Get back there. They're safe. They're doing a great job.
They feel safe.
Yeah, they feel safe. Exactly.
Yeah, it's just a nap time that didn't end up as a nap time. That's what happened.
Yeah.
But it's okay. We love being parents first and foremost.
Amen.
So.
Amen. But thank you all so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.